Hello, welcome. We'll be starting in a few seconds, just letting people come in.
Hmm.
Okay, so let's start. Welcome all to this webinar on evaluating approaches to country ownership across multilateral climate funds. My name is Giovanna Montagnier. I am a climate finance and evaluation consultant with Bastel, and I will have the pleasure to moderate this webinar. This session is part of the Climate Finance Evidence Series, a joint initiative to strengthen collaboration and learning across the evaluation functions of the Global Environment Facility, the Adaptation Fund, the Climate Investment Funds, and the Green Climate Fund. And I'm very excited about today's webinar because it addresses a crucial issue. How can we ensure that international climate finance is owned and driven by countries? As some of you certainly know, country ownership has long been a key principle of aid effectiveness, and it is considered critical in the delivery of climate finance. Broadly speaking, country ownership is intended to ensure the alignment of climate finance to country needs and priorities, as well as the meaningful engagement and even leadership of country stakeholders at the government and wider societal levels. And in this way, country ownership is expected to strengthen the positive impacts of climate finance and to increase countries' capacity and commitment to sustaining climate action in the long term. However, there is no commonly agreed definition of country ownership. And as you will see, in this session, the different multilateral climate funds have embedded country ownership in different ways in their business models. So in this context, the purpose of today's webinar is to start a dialogue around four key dimensions. How does each fund understand and define country ownership? How has each fund integrated country ownership into its operations? What are the key achievements and what are the key challenges and lessons learned? Today, I'm delighted to be joined by four panelists to explore this topic together. Rishabh, Moudgill, Policy and Evaluation Specialist with the Green Climate Fund's Independent Evaluation Unit, will provide an overview of key findings from a recent evaluation of GCF's approach to country ownership. Shehryar Janjua, a senior member of the Technical Evaluation Reference Group of the Adaptation Fund, will share his reflections on the Adaptation Fund's approach to country ownership based on evidence from multiple evaluations. Michael Ward, Head of Evaluation and Learning with the Climate Investment Funds, will discuss national investment planning as the cornerstone of the CIF's approach to country ownership based on recent and ongoing evaluations and studies. And last but not least, Juan José Portillo, Senior Operation Officer with the Global Environment Facility Independent Evaluation Office, will present key messages from the evaluation of the JEF country engagement strategy conducted under the umbrella of the 8th Comprehensive Evaluation of the JEF. And let me highlight that beyond their institutional roles, our panelists are originally from India, Pakistan, South Africa, Venezuela, with me joining from Mexico. So we hope to bring diverse perspectives to this discussion. Each panelist will give a short presentation, and at the end of the four presentations, we'll have a Q&A session. So please write any questions in the chat, and we'll do our best to address, if not all, some of them. So let's get started. Rishabh, over to you to get us started with the GCF experience.
Thanks, Giovanna, and let me add another country to the mix. Good evening, all from Incheon, South Korea. Today, I'm going to present the IEU's evaluation on country ownership that is due to be submitted to the upcoming board meeting next month. And for the sake of efficiency, I'm going to assume that the audience has some familiarity with GCF and its operations, with concepts like the NDA, the annual procedures, readiness climate financing, and the accreditation model. So let's jump right in. On definition, we find that the GCF has deliberately avoided a single fixed definition of country ownership. Instead, the understanding of country ownership varies across different fund-wide policies and operational instruments. This has allowed for a degree of necessary flexibility, which in many respects has had an advantage for the fund. At the same time, this evaluation challenges a common assumption in development and climate finance, particularly within the project-based architectures like the GCF, that country ownership can be inferred from procedural signals, such as issuance of no objection letters. Our finding suggests that this is misleading. Formal endorsement from governments does not in itself generate or guarantee country ownership. One of the key contributions of this evaluation was to move beyond procedural proxies and develop an explicit framework for understanding country ownership, because in order to strengthen it, we first needed to decipher what it actually means. So, how did the evaluation deal with the issue of country ownership being everything and nothing specific? We conceptualized country ownership as a quality of the system rather than a characteristic of individual projects. So we developed a three-layer framework that encompasses aspects crucial to measuring it. At the top, we have the macro level factors, including aspects such as the political economy, the fiscal space, the stability of institutions, and the wider climate governance environment that sets the climate narrative in the country. At the middle level, we have the structural factors. These are your hard policies, the hard structures, both at the system level and project level. These factors are the rules, the institutional arrangements in place to govern climate and their projects. For example, Ghana's policies and position of their NDA may be very different to Belize's. And finally, we have the cultural factors, the soft factors, a country's culture of engagement, transparency, their civil society landscape, and their habit of meaningful consultation that gives legitimacy to choices and trade-offs. This matters because we find that the GCF can only influence part of this picture. It can strengthen structures and incentives, but it cannot rewrite a country's political economy. So once you understand these factors, you can also understand who can influence, in what way, and to what degree across the project cycle. So we find that country ownership functions less as a static condition and more as a social contract between the fund and the countries. One that evolves over time, reflects underlying power relations and capacities, and is expressed differently at various stages of engagement. It definitely tells us that country ownership is unique to a system at that given time and cannot be imitated from country to country. It also tells us a few things. That we have to stop thinking of country ownership as a project by project thing. It is a characteristic of the system first and partly of the project. That ownership will look different across different contexts and across time. For example, even a change of government or change of NDA will completely overhaul ownership. That ownership cannot be generated overnight or simply by more consultations on a project. And lastly, we also find that the GCF has a role to play beyond just asking for NOLs and disbursing climate finance. So what role does the world's largest climate finance fund play currently? Let's talk about its operationalization. The GCF embeds country ownership through the NDA system, through its no objection NOL procedure, country programs, readiness support, and through its accreditation model, including direct access. We at the IU found that NDAs sit at the center. In practice, their influence depends on four concrete factors, such as their legal mandate, their staffing, their budget, and their convening authority across the national government. When NDAs have a strong mandate and sit close to the nation's core economic planning, it can steer priorities and manage a national pipeline. When it is thinly staffed or politically isolated within the government structure, its role becomes more administrative. On country programs, we found that they have the potential, but their use across GCS system is uneven and inconsistent. In several contexts, it's unclear whether country programs are being actively maintained, implicitly deprioritized, or effectively discontinued in practice. This uncertainty limits their ability to function as a reliable instrument of country ownership. Moving on to GCF's readiness support, which has played an important part enabling role, particularly in strengthening procedural capacity and supporting early engagement of entities with the GCF. However, readiness does not consistently translate into institutionalized ownership. We found that GCF's readiness interventions are often fragmented, time-bound, reliant on consultants, and limited in their durability. We also find that the no objection procedure is often treated as a proxy for country ownership. However, formal endorsement does not necessarily equate to sustained national influence over priorities or implementation. And as projects move into implementation, authority and control tend to shift towards accredited entities. And we found that this is true both in the case of direct access and international entities of the GCF. And while direct access remains as a cornerstone of GCF's ownership model, accreditation alone does not guarantee sustained country leadership, particularly where institutional capacity and predictable pipeline is weak. And from an evaluative perspective, this suggests that country ownership is often fragile from the outset and insufficiently reinforced during project implementation. Turning to achievements, the evaluation also finds that GCF has established one of the most explicit and institutionally embedded approaches to country ownership in the climate finance landscape. Country ownership is not incidental to the GCF model. It is embedded in its governing instrument, reflected across multiple policies, and reinforced through core operational mechanisms. Backed by evidence, I can confidently state that country ownership is very well established in GCF's DNA. You see it in the fund's emphasis on direct access, country-led programming, and other operational choices that put countries in the driver's seat. It also shows up in governance, with parity on the board and the GCF's responsiveness to COP guidance, which together gives developing countries a high degree of ownership over the fund. These aspects are part of the fund's genome code. We also point to the fact that GCF is among the youngest institutions in the multilateral space, and even on this panel. So its architecture is quite well aligned with the latest narrative on country ownership. The fund has also made sustained investments in providing readiness support, with the evaluation finding that it has strengthened countries' ability to engage with the fund, navigating its complex system, and participate more actively in project development. And in several contexts, the readiness finance funding from the fund has contributed to improved coordination, clearer articulation of priorities, and more informed engagement with accredited entities of the fund. Another achievement, direct access represents another important achievement in the sense where the results, although uneven, the expansion of direct access has sent a strong signal of trust in national institutions and has helped shift expectations around national leadership in climate finance. In countries with strong institutional capacity, this has translated into more strategic engagement and greater confidence in working with the fund. More broadly, the evaluation finds that where national institutions are strong and the coordination mechanisms are in place, the GCF model can and does enable meaningful expressions of country ownership. Turning finally to the challenges and lessons, the evaluation highlights a small number of structural issues, and this is also going to be my summary. First, procedural ownership does not sustain itself. While GCF has put into place strong front-end mechanisms, these do not automatically translate into lasting national influence over priorities or implementation. Second, NDA's authority and capacity still remain uneven. Formal designation matters, but institutional positioning, their mandate, and continuity matter more in practice. Third, key instruments intended to support ownership, particularly country programs and readiness finance, are not consistently reinforced across the fund. Country programs are used unevenly, and their role is not always clear, while readiness funding improves engagement but does not reliably embed durable national systems. And finally, country ownership tends to weaken during project implementation. Authority and control often shift away from national actors with limited mechanisms to reinforce country leadership once projects are underway being implemented by the accredited entities and the executing entities of the fund. I want to conclude by saying this. The main lesson from this evaluation is that country ownership is not a checkbox exercise, but a continuum that needs to be actively reinforced over time. Strengthening ownership, therefore, requires moving beyond front-end procedures towards institutional arrangements and post-approval governance that enable countries to exercise sustained leadership. With this, I conclude my presentation here. Please wish us luck as we present this to our board next month and speak truth to power. And if you want to know more, please read our evaluation report. It's got much more meat inside it. Thank you so much for your time and attention. Kamsahamnida. Over to you, Giovanna.
Thank you, Rishabh. And by the way, I've posted the GCF country ownership evaluation report on the webinar chat, and I will be posting other relevant evaluations and studies as we move forward with the presentations. Now let's move on to Shehryar to hear about the Adaptation Fund's approach to country ownership. Shehryar, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Giovanna, and hello, everyone. So nice to see you all here today. My name is Shehryar Janjua. I'm a member of the Technical Evaluation Reference Group of the Adaptation Fund, and I'm here representing them today in this presentation on the approach to country ownership across multilateral funds. I realize that time is limited, so we'll jump straight into it with the next slide, please. Thank you. So the Adaptation Fund actually has a fairly unique niche in the way it positions itself and engages with stakeholders across the climate landscape, and in the way we have developed our programming portfolio. Our priorities are really underpinned by a strong element of country ownership, country drivenness, and this is reflected in the fund's emphasis on most marginalized people and communities, direct and enhanced access. There's also a very strong focus on building long-term institutional capacity, particularly in the LDCs and SIDS. We tend to provide smaller scale grants or starter projects, as they're sometimes called. And we've established a variety of funding windows aimed to enable access to climate finance, particularly at the country level. So windows such as locally led adaptation and innovation. And even in the way our projects are designed, there's a very strong emphasis on local approaches such as ecosystem-based adaptation, nature-based adaptation, and indigenous skills and knowledge. And the Adaptation Fund's overall programming model is one where we are able to pilot innovative projects at the country level and then help scale them up and replicate them by enabling access to climate finance more broadly. So you can see there's a overarching emphasis on country ownership. And taken together, country ownership can be seen as a combination of capabilities to inclusively define local adaptation priorities and to develop appropriate strategies and action plans. Next slide, please. So this emphasis on country ownership is also apparent in the Adaptation Fund's strategic approach. Our medium-term strategy 2, which was rolled out in 2023 and which will be in force until 2027, and its implementation plan both focus heavily on country ownership. You will see in the diagram that there are 3 circles which represent the pillars of the strategy, and under each we have a set of results which we are looking to measure with a strong emphasis on country level achievements, and 6 cross-cutting themes, again strongly undergirded by country ownership. So whether we look at promoting locally led adaptation, enhancing access to climate finance, building institutional capacity, empowering marginalized people and groups, enhancing gender equality, enabling the scaling or replication of results, you'll see that country ownership is really implicit across each one of these categories. Next slide, please. So in terms of the available evaluative evidence, we haven't conducted a specific study on country ownership, but this has been a recurrent cross-cutting theme across several of our studies. And the way the Technical Evaluation Reference Group, or the TERG, has been carrying out its evaluations is we are looking to generate evidence at different levels, which collectively help us to establish a fuller picture about what is working, what is not working in terms of country ownership. So at the operational level, we've really been fortunate because we have a rich portfolio of ex post evaluations, which are carried out typically 3 to 5 years after a project successfully concludes. That has been able to provide us a lot of insights on country ownership and what is working, what is not working. We have conducted 8 evaluations so far, and a further 4 are planned for this year. Like most other funds, we conduct project level evaluations, which are led by the Adaptation Fund Secretariat for all of our funded activities. And the TERG actually helps in developing an annual synthesis of these project level evaluations, which is also very interesting in terms of understanding different aspects related to country ownership. At a thematic level, we've been studying different dimensions which are strongly related to enabling successful country ownership. So, for instance, we conducted a readiness evaluation just this year. We have a very strong emphasis on implementing entity outreach and engagement, especially at the national level. And we've conducted an accreditation evaluation, which has been studying different aspects of the accreditation process. And in terms of the fund's programming and financing models, that emphasis on innovation and scalability has been studied through separate evaluations in 2023 and 2025. And then perhaps most importantly, at the strategic and fund level, we have conducted a variety of evaluations which help us to understand what is working and what is not working in terms of country ownership. So we conducted a rapid evaluation of the Adaptation Fund in 2023. And one of the strong focus areas for that evaluation was understanding whether or not the Adaptation Fund has been supportive and responsive to country needs, and whether it has been able to deliver impact in terms of articulated country needs. We are currently in the process of undertaking the medium-term review of our medium-term strategy too. Quite a mouthful, I realize, but that is actually going to have a focus on understanding how our strategy has been delivering, what the performance has been. And we are also conducting a governance processes and systems evaluation, as well as a comprehensive evaluation of the Adaptation Fund in the current year. So all in all, we expect that we will have a lot more findings and learnings from our evaluations in terms of country ownership over the coming few months. Next slide, please. So I've actually tried to assemble some insights and learning from our current evaluative evidence, and I didn't want to go into an exhaustive list, and rather what I tried to do was distill the key points that we've learned around country ownership from our current evaluation portfolio. And I think the first lesson, which resonates with what was shared from the GCF's perspective earlier as well, is that country engagement, country ownership, these are long-term processes which take a lot of time, effort to cultivate. And what we found the most critical ingredient is in this respect is strong country institutional engagement and trust. And that obviously takes time to build. We have also learned that country ownership does not automatically imply inclusion, and inclusion needs to be ensured within each country's context by ensuring there is an analysis of who the most marginalized people and segments are, and actively trying to include them. A challenge which we observed at the Adaptation Fund is that there is a tension between introducing concepts such as locally led adaptation, marginalization, and adequate protection in a way that is both flexible but also ensures the quality and coherence of our portfolio. So these definitions have to be kept loose in order to cater to a variety of country contexts. But then equally, how do we ensure that the coherence and the quality in our projects is ensured throughout this process? So what we found is that standardized approaches which help us to appreciate the complexity of different contexts and study that complexity in a systematic way can be particularly helpful. So approaches such as political economy analysis can help us to identify who the truly marginalized segments are and how best they can be incorporated within project design. Capacity challenges have emerged across the board. I think in the GCF presentation as well, it was apparent that capacity variability across the different NDAs and the different institutional partners can be an impediment to country ownership. And given the sort of sheer scale of the needs at the moment and the funding situation and the realities that we deal with, I think there's a very strong need to pool funding across the different climate funds in order to help improve capacity in a synergistic way, especially in priorities areas such as, developing results-based programs and really having an emphasis on monitoring and evaluation systems and capacities. And the final point from our side would be direct access is important, but in some cases, particularly where there are capacity constraints in SIDS, LDCs, regional and multilateral approaches with the right setup can actually be more efficient in terms of enabling access to climate finance. So there's, again, a bit of a nuanced argument in terms of direct access. So that brings me to the end of my presentation. All the studies that have been referenced, I understand Juan has helpfully shared the links, and yeah, very happy to answer any questions at the end. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Shehryar. And I remind you to post any questions in the chat for the discussion we'll have later. So let's now hear from the CIF and its programmatic approach grounded in national investment planning. Michael, go ahead.
Thank you, Giovanna, and yeah, a big thank you to GCF for hosting what I think is a really important and timely discussion. I'm going to focus on CIF's operation and operating model and its relationship to country ownership. Yeah, so I think if we move to the next slide, since 2008, when the CIF started, we've consistently used a programmatic approach to inform our work. Over the last 17 years, about $7.7 billion US dollars has been approved in funding across these 11 large program areas. And as we've done this work, we've really tried to embed country ownership in the way that we work through a number of processes that I'll come back to a couple of times during this presentation. The first is country-led investment plans. The second is working across government, so multi-ministerial coordination with a strong focus on ministries of finance and planning, given their cross-ministerial work, but also sector ministries. Strong multilateral development bank collaboration. So we work with the World Bank Group, with the Asian Development Bank, the European International Development Bank, the African Development Bank, and the Inter-American Development Bank. And I think that this coordination is important. And then also the use of predictable multi-year resource envelopes. So many of our programs have 5 to 10 year horizons, and they support long-term planning. I think that the country-led investment planning has really involved this portfolio of investments, a large programmatic view, rather than project-by-project approaches. And we've really sought to avoid fragmented project pipelines. If we move to the next slide, the focus of the CIF throughout this time has been on learning by doing. So our understanding of country ownership has really developed through a refinement of program design principles through 17 years of practice and 10 years of independent evaluations. And Giovanna will share a number of evaluations. I think a key one was an evaluation of CIF's programmatic approach. More recently, we've done large program evaluations across things like the scaling of renewable energy program, the forest investment program, and the pilot program on climate resilience. We're currently doing evaluations on the large clean technology fund and the programs under that. And then also sort of thematic evaluations on, for example, development impacts. And all of these have had a focus in some way on how to better operationalize SIF's programmatic approach. So maybe just to highlight again a couple of points from the operating model that are consistently reviewed across these evaluations, and that I'll come back to as we look at some of the achievements, challenges, and lessons learned. So the first is this investment plan development. There are large investment plans that a couple of countries, after an expression of interest, are asked to develop. They're country-led, they're MDB supported, and they need to demonstrate a transformational vision. So they need to have a big kind of systemic change at scale at the very heart of these plans. The programmatic design within these investment plans seeks to strategically link multiple projects and has a strong systems approach. So it'll look across multiple sectors and look at how they interact and how best to work with them. A strong focus on governance and coordination. I've mentioned the multi-ministerial approach, the MDB collaboration, and then stakeholder engagement, which is a requirement of the investment plan development process. So it's not kind of nice to have. It's something that our board will look at before approving country investment plans. And then again, this notion of learning by doing. I think embedding monitoring, evaluation, and learning teams within the climate investment funds, within the Secretariat, has allowed us to support adaptive management. If we look across these various areas at some of the key achievements in the next slide, I think that some of them include a really strong strategic coherence. So we've seen alignment with national priorities as we've worked with this programmatic approach. It has definitely reduced fragmentation. We've seen sustained country leadership, certainly stronger ownership where the programmatic intent has been sustained, and where that programmatic intent has a kind of transformational vision. We've seen significant scaling and leverage potential, certainly across the sort of 7.7 billion of committed funding. We've also seen co-financing of around $73 billion US. And I think that part of this is the provision of a clear pipeline that has enhanced investor confidence. I think that all of this work is enabling the emerging almost refocus on country platforms. We are able to anchor the investment framework in these country-led investment plans and support the coordination structures for country platforms. Of course, with these achievements, there are also some challenges and lessons learned in the next slide. So I think that one of the lessons that we continuously come back to, and that you'll see in every one of the evaluations that we've shared, is that the ownership weakens during implementation. So there is this tendency to have a very strong kind of programmatic orientation in the design and development of investment plans, and yet there is this kind of shift back into project by project focus as implementation continues. I think one of the things that we're realizing is that country ownership really needs to be resourced. It needs to be strongly incentivized and really support authority coordination beyond the planning phase. Coordination structures can also be fragile. I think it's been mentioned by a couple of the other presenters. Focal points sometimes lack power and often lack continuity. And so ownership really needs to be institutionalized in a durable way. And this is some of the work with ministries of finance and planning. Working with across large multilateral development banks, they have their own priorities, of course, and sometimes the incentives are not always aligned. It does require kind of constant support and the need to work at a systemic level to maintain this work across the multilateral development banks to keep them kind of aligned as implementation for unrolls. And then the learning systems are often, I think, under-leveraged. The feedback loops are weak during implementation. And I think we need to recognize that in emergent contexts, that ownership itself is dynamic and that we need to develop monitoring, evaluation, learning systems at a country level. I wanted to focus a little bit on what that might mean for us as a collective of multilateral climate funds. And in the next slide, just a diagram that we've been working on with Ross Strategic to try and understand some of how we might support the interoperability between multilateral climate funds. I think what the diagram represents is, or tries to represent, is that first of all, at a kind of country-led, country platform level, we still see very small overlaps between, for example, the Climate Investment Fund's programmatic approach, the other MCFs, the MDBs, and other partners. So there is overlap, there's collaboration, but it could be enhanced. I think we're also seeing some kind of siloing between different sort of country areas of focus, between, for example, clean energy or nature-based solutions or industrial decarb. If we move to the next slide, I think that one of the things that we collectively need to focus on to support better harmonization is the arrows in this diagram. So how do we kind of create greater overlap between the different programmatic approaches that we're talking about and that we're sharing in this presentation, and also between the kind of sectors, the big areas, if we're going to take a more sort of systematic and systemic approach to our work. So I think that we need to understand these arrows, what's going on in them, and how we support greater harmonization. And in my last slide, and maybe as a kind of summary, I think some of the areas for increased interoperability that we're seeing in the presentation, I think greater planning alignment that is country relevant and country led. How do we work together to support some of that sort of investment planning process? How do we build capacity? And I think that the readiness support that GCF offers is a key part of this. We tend to work with building capacity and alignment through things like the investment plan readiness or program funding, planning support. We need to work with stakeholder engagement and participation, so beyond just government, to build greater sense of country ownership across civil society, labor, private sector, etc. We need to support an enabling environment and technical assistance, so the policy alignment needs to be in place. We need to support project pipeline development and screening, so they need to fit in better. The individual projects need to fit in well with the kind of overarching programmatic view. We need to look at possibilities for co-financing coordination across multiple actors in the climate finance architecture. We need to work in terms of monitoring and reporting at shared indicators, and there's some great work, I think, going on across the MCFs in this area. We need to work on evaluation and learning, and particularly building country capacity for this kind of work. And finally, we need to, I think, do some of this through things like the knowledge hubs. The country platform hub is a great example of that, and various learning platforms, including this kind of sharing. And with that, I'll wrap it up and hand it back to Giovanna. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mike. I see that some key themes are recurring across the presentations. So I hope we can discuss more in the Q&A session. So let's close the presentations with highlights from the GEF's country engagement strategy evaluation. Over to you, Juan.
Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you, Giovanna. Greetings from Washington, D.C. My name is Juan Jose Portillo. I am a Senior Operations Officer with the GEF Independent Evaluation Office, and I'm here to present a short presentation about the findings of the evaluation of the GEF country engagement strategy that was done by the office last year to be part of the comprehensive evaluation of the GEF OPS 8. So next slide, please. Okay, what is the country ownership of the GEF? Country ownership is a core principle of the GEF because allows the design of programs and projects that are country-driven and based on national priorities designed to support sustainable development. At the same time, there is a country-level coordination through focal points, that it's the involvement at the local level is very important, and that leads to the stakeholder involvement at different stages of the project cycle. That is pretty much one of the main goals of having this program in place. Next slide, please. To little bit of the history, the GF being the oldest of these funds, we started the country support program back in 1999 that was managed by UNDP as a independent program of then, financed by the GF. Later in 2005, the program was jointly performed or done by UNDP and UNEP until 2010, when it was brought to the GF Secretariat. Being one of the main reasons is that the program was not creating greater visibility for the GF at that time. The program was pretty much linked to UNDP and UNEP, and that was not the idea. After several years of implementation, in 2022, it was decided that instead of the country support program, it will change to a country engagement strategy that will include a more broad point to involve stakeholders and local groups. Next slide, please. The country engagement strategy, as we know, basically have as an objective aims to enhance the recipient country's capacity to make strategic decisions about the GF resources and to sustain their impact towards a global target. It seeks improved country ownership, strategic alignment with national and GF priorities, greater visibility for the GF, improved portfolio development, policy coherence, and increased coordination with other funds at the country level. The previous country support program was only looking at, as the word said, support, providing information to the local governments, but not getting engaged with them in the formulation of their portfolios. Next slide. So in this case, we decided after 4 years of implementation, almost 4 years of implementation, and as a part of the OPS 8, we decided to do, it was decided to do an evaluation of the GF country engagement strategy. Although it was fairly new, it was good to do a little review to see how this was performing. The purpose of the evaluation was to assess the evolution, implementation progress, and early outcomes of the C country engagement strategy to inform the 8th comprehensive evaluation of the GF, OPS 8, and the 9th replenishment of the GF that is currently underway. Next slide. The evaluation of the country engagement strategy have the current findings. I'm grouping this in these 5 topics. First one is country ownership and empowerment. We have found the country engagement strategy has facilitated the knowledge sharing and portfolio control, has increased the alignment with the national priorities, has enabled a broader stakeholder engagement, especially through the national dialogues. And as an example, in Suriname in 2004, the national dialogue, it was noticed there was a marked need of inclusive approach. That was one of the first examples when we start seeing that inclusiveness is very important, and this program is reaching it. The second aspect is strategic alignment and portfolio development. These aspects, the country engagement strategy is providing platforms for refining and prioritizing projects to clarify programming options and are raising awareness of other funding windows, such as the Global Biodiversity Framework Fund, GBFF, and the Capacity Building Initiative for Transparency, CBIT. So it's providing more information to countries and to groups about different pots of funds that they can apply to. We have the national policy coherence. The finding in this regard was there's an initial dialogue on cross-sector coordination, but this only stayed at agenda setting rather than resulting in a concrete policy shift. So they need to continue working to try to improve this national policy coherence. And one of the challenges is that there's a little understanding about the policy coherent activities that can be done in order to get this policy shift that are expected. Another finding was the GF visibility. I think the country engagement strategy is getting there. The GF has struggled all this time to try to get a little more visibility, especially at local level, because most of the time the GF is strongly linked to the implementing agencies. So it's very important for the GF to start enhancing this visibility at local level, especially in community levels, is still a big challenge. And the other aspect that we have finding is like the coordination with the other fund is limited operational level collaboration with some. There's some pilot joint programming consultations with the Green Climate Fund in Rwanda, Uganda, we found. But high level commitment exists, but needs to be better organized. There needs to be more coordination because this is not there at the moment. And but also I would like to highlight that all these among the findings that the country engagement strategy activities are perceived as inclusive, engaging, and diverse stakeholders that are now including the government, civil society organization, academia, and private sector. Next slide. So we have the following conclusions regarding the country engagement strategy after this evaluation. One of them is like when implementing the country engagement strategy, activities make a small but important contributions to enhancing country ownership of the GF portfolio because facilitate the knowledge and information sharing, is alignment of the GF portfolio with the national priorities, and there's a wider stakeholder engagement. However, most of the time, the more frequent and diverse capacity building is needed through a mix of in-person activities, virtual training, and outreach. This is something that needs to be stressed out because in this day and age, I mean, the outreach, it's very wide based on these new technologies that we have. Next slide. So the CES at the same time, and is a more proactive approach to country engagement, but needs to address issues related to design, management, monitoring, timing, and collaboration. I understand that the GF is going through the process of improving and enhancing the country engagement strategy as it is now, and it's looking into this aspect. The implementation is slower than expected. In this case, is because also the GF at that time when this program started being implemented is going through some transition and through some internal changes that slow. But since this evaluation was done, I mean, like activities has picked up and they're already now in full implementation. And also need to improve in areas related again to the GF visibility, policy coherence, and coordination with other funds. And also uneven stakeholder engagement. So that needs to be strengthened. Next. So the recommendations of the evaluation of the country engagement strategy. The first one that we wrote was improve the country engagement strategy design and accountability, because the country engagement strategy needs to develop a coherent intervention logic with realistic outcomes. It needs a clear articulation of activity contributions and need to establish a simple but effective information management, monitoring, and reporting system. The other recommendation is to strengthen operational management. It should empower the programming manager to lead the country engagement strategy implementation across division, fostering communication, coordination, and information sharing among the staff. And this is very important to highlight because the country engagement strategy needs, or any activity related to country engagement strategy needs to be, it's not the responsibility of only one group. It's a responsibility of the entire organization, because we all at one specific point, we engage in some level with a local officials and stakeholders. After that, we have diversified engagement and improved timing to create regional engagement plans based on country needs, sequence global, regional, and country level activities for synergy, and proactively support specific country categories, in this case, LDCs and SIDS, which tailor financial and capacity building support using mixed delivery modes. This case is very important the timing is very important. We're about to start the new GF9 cycle, and it will be very important for the countries at this point to get the support and engagement from the GF in order to work on their portfolios. And we need also to increase the visibility and empower stakeholders. It's widely disseminate country engagement strategy information. We need to do a better demand-based activity processes and implementation through multiple channels to enhance engagement and accountability. Again, as I said, it's not the responsibility of one group, but it should be the responsibility pretty much of all the staff working for the GF. And the last thing is to focus on impact and synergies in GS9. It should maintain a core cost-effective activity, explore synergies with other GF capacity building windows and all their multilateral funds, and consider to join readiness facilities to sustain country engagement effort. I would like to highlight that all these recommendations were taken upon in the program directions of the GF9 that was presented to the donors in Bonn early this year. We're very happy all these recommendations were considered by the GF, were included in the program, and also the OPS 8, that is the big report of the office, is also being taken mention and consider for the next cycle of the GF9. So, Giovanna, having said that, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Juan. So there are so many questions in the chat. I've been trying to group them a bit so that we can address them all together. Several of the questions from the audience refer to country ownership beyond government engagement, and extending it to other non-state actors such as private sector, civil society, indigenous communities and local communities. So I'd like to hear your views on this. Some of the themes that the audience is sharing are around, for example, direct financing for indigenous people and local communities, how their knowledge has been integrated and considered in this in country ownership approaches, but also if there are any good practices in terms of engaging these actors and other societal actors. So maybe we can start with Rishabh, because I know that this is a theme that was addressed in the country ownership evaluation that the GCF-IU recently completed.
Yes, Giovanna, but I want to thank Francisca for raising this very imperative question. And maybe I'll switch gears here because I want to talk about two different evaluations here. Francisca, the IU undertook an independent evaluation of GCF's approach to IPs only last year, which we submitted to the board, containing some somewhat called very bold recommendations, and the GCF's board adopted our recommendations. In that evaluation, we found that GCF is the only fund in this crowd without a dedicated grant mechanism or window for IPs, and its commitment had not fully come into force. And that evaluation also found that the policy and the general architecture of the fund is directed more towards do no harm approach and not so much of the do good approach. And there are also other systemic barriers like A-led models based in national priorities and somewhat challenging scales. So based on that evidence, we recommended for the GCF to consider a window specific to IPs. That if in fact reaching the IPs is GCF's commitment, GCF needs a mechanism for it. And you'd be happy to know that we've informally heard the Secretariat is working on something to that work. So yes, that was a recommendation made and adopted by the GCF board. But now switching gears and bringing it to the country ownership evaluation that we're going to present to the board soon. In this evaluation, we're making a recommendation to the GCF to provide resources to non-state actors. And this recommendation also answers another question raised in the chat about how country ownership can be viewed as a compliance exercise. In this evaluation, we found that stakeholder engagement remains largely procedural, oriented towards compliance rather than meaningful dialogue. So our recommendation is specific to the GCF at this given moment, as it's restructuring itself and heading towards regional presence, that it needs to target inclusivity, trust, and recognition of diverse voices should become the default feature. So we have recommended that inclusion becomes a default feature of G7's operations by embedding participation within country platforms. And to answer your question, Joanna, funding non-state actors alongside setting minimum standards for consultations and engagement. The uptake of this recommendation is yet to be tested. We'll only know by next month how this sits with the board. So yes, wish us luck for that. Cheers.
Yeah, thank you. I would also like to hear the other panelists on this, how, based on evaluative evidence, have different funds addressed this need for whole society country ownership. And I ask you to keep your interventions brief because we don't have that much time left.
Maybe I can jump in because there was a comment on the dedicated grant mechanism. I think that we learned a lot through the dedicated grant mechanism. It was funding specifically orientated towards Indigenous people and local communities. It has been looked at in a number of our evaluations, including particularly the forest investment program. And out of that work, in the last couple of days, an announcement to expand the scope of that dedicated grant mechanism. It was almost entirely implemented previously by the World Bank Group. We will now expand that to the other multilateral development banks, and it will expand across the Nature People Climate Program and other areas of our work. So an important area of work. From an evaluation perspective, I think we need to kind of take to heart the realist evaluation approach of not just kind of what works, why and where, but also for whom. And I saw a comment on that, and to kind of really build that into the terms of reference in our evaluations. For whom are these things working and how needs to be an important question. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Juan or Shehryar, would you like to jump
in?
Yes,
if I may add one thing, one of the things that the GF is actually implementing is the support to the OFPs, the operational focal points at local level. We think that this is very important because, it's like we're here or we're in our office, but the person in the field is our connection to the stakeholder and direct access to them. So it's very important also the local support that the communities should have because improve and enhance and make the dialogue a little more effective because it's a presence there.
Yeah, definitely. And the GEF also has a long experience with national dialogues, which bring in a lot of different stakeholders beyond government. Shehryar,
yeah, based on the experience of the GF, it's more about not only making or preparing meetings here in DC and going to the countries, is also empowering the local level people.
Yeah.
I'm conscious of the time, so I'll keep it extremely brief. Just building on what Michael said, what we found is that a systematic analysis of the incentives being created as part of project implementation is really helpful as well. And that really allows stakeholders to come together more effectively and ensure that, engagement is more sustainable. So that political economy lens about, who's being included in the project and then what are the incentives to make sure that engagement is sustained, I think is key. Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to share a final question so that we can have a final round of comments from the presenters. And this is about any perspectives or opportunities to streamline the working of the country ownership models across the funds. So do you see any opportunities to work more together on this? And I know that there were some elements of this in the presentations, but I'd like to hear maybe brief closing remarks on this. Michael, would you like to get us started?
Yeah, I think that this kind of initiative, sharing these sorts of perspectives around country ownership collaboratively across the independent evaluation groups is important, because in a way the evaluation can be the tail that wags the dog. If we kind of understand what country ownership looks like and we start to focus on it in our evaluations, I think it drives the focus of that country ownership back into the program. And so the work with our monitoring teams across a shared set of indicators that I think has progressed well, and the work across these evaluation funds to try and identify what are some of the key areas and outcomes that we should be looking for in our evaluation, can have a big impact on the way that we design programs from the start. Thank you.
Thank you. Rishabh, any closing remarks?
I mean, I'll keep it very short. I have to agree totally with you, Mike, here. There's a consideration that we hear at the secretariat level to streamline pipeline management and implementation. And we're also seeing that with fragmentation of the landscape, it is additionally a challenge for particularly low capacity contexts. So yes, hoping that the tail that wags the dog works well for us in our context. And we're just waiting to see how that's uptaken and then how the secretariat in turn implements a recommendation. So yes, cheers. Thanks for bringing this point across.
Shehryar?
So as I mentioned during the presentation as well, I think we need to start with the relatively smaller wins, and capacity building in carefully identified prioritized areas can be really the key. And hopefully that can create the sort of goodwill and momentum to branch off coordination into other areas as well. But one of the closest sort of areas that we've observed time and time again is that gap in local data collection capacity, and indeed the capacity to analyze and evaluate as well. So if we can prioritize one or two sort of sectors, aim for greater coordination there, that can hopefully give us the momentum to build on it. Thank you.
Thank you. Juan, any final remarks?
Yes, hi. But the thing is, like, this is a moving target. This is a work in progress. So country engagement strategy, stakeholder, this is it's in constant evolution. So we're going to do a lot of trial and error, but I think that the main idea and objectives are there, and we're trying to reach them and get that goal.
Yes, definitely. And let's hope this is the start of a rich dialogue among the funds on this very important issue. Thank you so much to the panelists for their super interesting presentations, and thank you all for joining us today. Have a good rest of your day or evening.
Thank you so much.
Have a good one. Thank you for your time.
Bye.
Thanks all.
Thank you.